Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekly dose of headlines, controversies, and media perspectives. A high voltage week where you saw ups and downs on the farmers' issue, political violence in Bengal, and yet another local body elections throwing up new trends. So, what made news? Agreement remained elusive despite 6 rounds of marathon dialogue between the government and the Kisan Netas. Even as Union Home Minister Amit Shah met with the farmers' representatives and explained the concessions agreed to by the government, the leaders said they wanted repeal of the 3 reform legislations. The government has been reiterating its appeal to farmers to end their stir and rejoin the stalled negotiations. The ball now lies squarely in the court of the protesting farmers. Much more on this in our next segment. A new parliament awaits new India when we complete 75 years of our independence. Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid the foundation of this new complex with a Bhumi Pujan and an all-faith prayer earlier this week. Terming it a milestone in India's history, PM Modi said the new complex would truly reflect the aspirations of a new India. We will discuss this more in a few moments. After the high-stakes corporation polls in Hyderabad, it is the turn of Rajasthan, reversing a decade-long trend of the ruling party bagging these seats. BJP came out the winner in Panchayat Samiti and Zilla Parishad elections. The ruling Congress suffered major reverses. The COVID vaccine machinery in India is geared up and working round the clock for the rollout in the next few weeks. Serum Institute of India and Bharat Biotech have already applied for the mandatory emergency use authorization. At least 3 crore frontline workers, which includes healthcare professionals and security personnel, will be inoculated in first go. With BJP President JP Nadda and senior leaders getting attacked and 2 BJP workers killed, this was another violent week in West Bengal. JP Nadda was there as part of his national tour. Assembly polls in Bengal are still few months away, and the rising violence has raised serious questions about the law and order situation in the state. After that brief look at the major headlines which dominated media space this week, it's time to introduce my special panel of guests this evening. I have 2 very senior journalists with me who will share their understanding and perspective on a couple of those hot issues. Let me introduce my guests to you. I have with me here Professor M.D. Nalapat, Senior Professor at the Manipal University, well-known commentator, political observer, strategic political economy expert. Welcome, Professor Nalapat. Welcome back to Media Scan. I also have here with me Deepshikha Sikarwar, Senior Editor at The Economic Times, also an expert on political economy and a regular in news channels, and you must be reading her regularly on current affairs. Deepshikha, welcome on your first appearance in the Media Scan. In the last episode of Media Scan, we discussed how there were many forces, political and otherwise, who were holding up a resolution on the farmers' agitation. This week, viewers, the farmers hardened their stance, leading to almost a breakdown in the negotiations. This, despite the fact that the government has been reiterating the concessions and amendments on the agriculture reform laws. Meanwhile, unrelated issues like the demand to release Delhi riot accused, protesters demanding Khalistan in London and other Western countries, and all such things have vitiated the situation further. Most newspaper editorials have criticized the maximalist position adopted by the Kisan Netas, while also asking the government to be mindful of their future and concerns. Economy experts are firm that reforms have been long overdue. So, where does this go from here? Let's discuss. Professor Nalapat, I want to come to you first. Just to repeat what I said just now, where do you see this going henceforth?
Well, in my view, I think it's going to be very important for the government to carry through this particular reform And of course, there is scope for amendments and changes such that some of the farmers' concerns can be taken into account. I think one of those concerns will be about the current system of mandis.
Okay.
And I think from that point of view, I think some amendments have been. See, the point is here. It is not that anything is being abolished. It's only that a monopoly of a system is being abolished. And monopolies are never a good thing. When you have monopolies, you have too much of control by a few players on price. You have a problem for the consumer, you have a problem for the producer, and the only beneficiaries are the monopolists.
Precisely,
So,
sir. And this is
yes.
what the government has been flagging continuously. Why do you think stakeholders who have a direct relation to the agriculture economy should mind breaking of a monopoly? Doesn't that defy logic?
Well, I'd like to say that I think messaging is very, very important. And I think those individuals who are protecting their monopolies have been very skillful in giving a messaging, basically taking the spotlight away from them and putting it on the farming community as though this is hostile to the farmer.
Right.
Actually, it is hostile to monopolies. So I think the messaging has got to be much more clearer, and the messaging has got to be disseminated more widely so that the public can understand. Then the
Okay,
second
so
point,
let me
yeah.
bring in Deepshikha here, sir. Deepshikha Sikarwar, this issue of messaging, the right kind of messaging going or not going to the stakeholders has been discussed and done to death by now. And yet, we do not see a resolution immediately. Do you think messaging or rather communication has been the key problem, or there are other vested interests and powers who are trying to hold up a resolution? They are trying to mislead people as the government has claimed?
I'm sure, Smita, that could be one of the issues, and a lot of people have been writing and expressing belief. In fact, even the government is on record saying that there are other forces that sort of are acting behind this sort of agitation that has happened, because you don't see any effort or any kind of you know people coming to the table for discussion or talks. If you want a resolution, you have to actually look at something, some middle ground which can be struck between on these reforms. Now, a complete rollback of three legislations which has been passed by the parliament cannot be, a position which can sort of go along. But definitely, I would agree to this, what Dr. Nalpat, Professor Nalpat said just now. There seems to be, this issue about getting the messaging right to the stakeholders. These reforms are very substantial, very key reforms, which seek to really revolutionize the way the agriculture sector sort of works. So that messaging, that effectiveness probably led to this kind of a situation wherein it has been made into something which is harmful for the farmers, whereas most economists and everybody, you can have corrections to the system, but the fact that these reforms have happened, that is a huge thing for the agriculture sector per
Right.
se.
Deepshikha, I gather two things here. Number one, that people like you who have been following agriculture economy and you understand the subject in depth have been flagging the need for reforms, including many other experts both in India and abroad. Professor Nalapat, on the question of communication, the government has been consistently reiterating its position about giving a very long rope to the farmers, about agreeing to so many concessions, and we are seeing more and more things coming out every day about how the government has been allaying the fears of the farmers. Even if we agree that there was some issue with communication and there were forces trying to mislead, after those marathon meetings and those 6 rounds of dialogue, shouldn't those apprehensions have been done away with? Shouldn't the farmers have felt reassured when they are speaking to the government directly, to the top leadership?
Well, I'd like to say that even before the dialogue began, many of the leaders of the dialogue were very clear that
Yes.
they want a rollback and only a rollback. Now, as has correctly been said by my colleague, if you start with a maximalist position, and you stick with that position, it's not really a dialogue, it's a monologue. And that kind of a thing will not work so far as the conciliation process is concerned. I am told that one of the problems is that certain people involved in the agriculture market are worried about the fact that they will have to register under GST. They will
Precisely.
have to give their PAN card details. Now, the point is this protects the farmer. Now, when these people are controlling the trade and you don't even know their PAN card, you don't know how much they're making, they can make extortionate profits without the farmer and the consumer knowing how much they're making. Now, if they're registered, you will know exactly how much they're making. You will know who they are. So actually, these protect the farmer. And in my view, I think, a simple number of bullet points, how greater transparency and accountability protects the farmer, is not hostile to the farmer, is very much needed, because it is very clear certain interests want to humiliate the government. They want the government to roll back the reforms. And I think if that is the case, it's a slippery slope, because
Okay,
tomorrow you're going
right,
to
sir.
have.
Deepshika, I want to come to you on this. Just a quick remark. Knowing that there will always be powers in the market who will not like these reform bills to be implemented, my question to you is, what is the best way for the government and the farmers, both the stakeholders? How do you think they can resolve this situation and go ahead with the reforms, keeping in mind the interests of the country, the farmers, their future, and not getting played by these market forces?
See, Smita, there are two issues here. Now, there is always, you'll see huge inertia when it comes to sort of changing something. And these three agriculture laws are seeking to change phenomenally the way farm sector has worked. Now, what farmers need to be told, the on ground farmers who's actually impacted by these laws, is what they are seeking to do, what they are seeking to change.
Right.
Now, we've seen how the other parts of the agriculture sector have evolved, wherein such restrictions have not been there. Say, for example, milk. Milk has grown phenomenally in the country. Why has that growth not been seen in the cereals? Basically because it's a very controlled environment. Now
On
that
the issue
control
of
is
the phenomenal change, Deepshika, I have a quick query here. When you talk of phenomenal change, maybe in paddy or wheat, I can agree. But if you look at it in a wholesome manner, state to state, we are seeing a lot of the reforms which are now being proposed have already been in effect at the state level in most of Indian states already for past some years. It's not such a sea change, is it?
totally, totally. But the most impacted states for cereal production have been Punjab and Haryana, and we are seeing most agitation coming from Punjab.
True.
Now, whether this is because of ineffective communication, or whether this is that it has been hijacked by political motives, we have to actually go into this. I'm sure farmers have their own apprehensions, like anyone would have to, adapt to any change that is being thrust upon them. But I think government here has to sort of stick to its ground. These reforms are phenomenal. They seek to change the way agriculture sector really works in this country. They are path-breaking reforms. The government
Okay.
cannot go back
So
to these
Deepshika
reforms.
Shikarwar are very, very clear here on the point that the government must stick to its stand if it wants reforms which are surely much needed. On that, I want to move on to one aspect of this whole larger issue, which we saw played out this week and also the last week. Professor Nalapat, we just saw the results of the Rajasthan local body elections, and the BJP has claimed that considering the fact that it bucked the trend of, going ahead in numbers of seats in these elections against the ruling party, that is Congress, which has not been happening in Rajasthan for more than a decade now. Now, the BJP claims this is a clear stamp of approval by farmers, since these were rural polls, and so, which means there are vested interests and most of the country's farmers are with them. How do you look at this? Do you agree with the BJP's explanation? Do you think there is more to it?
As my colleague Deepshika has very correctly said, this agitation essentially is confined to Punjab mainly, and so Haryana, and small bits and pieces of UP possibly. But the
Western UP.
Western UP, that's all. The reality is that, frankly, the current system incentivizes farmers to grow wheat and rice, that 40% of which is fed to rats. I mean, the reality of situation is that 40% of our grain, I am told, goes to waste. I have always been surprised why government does not do wheat diplomacy, rice diplomacy, and at least send it out to people in other parts of the world. Because
And
the
earn
reality
some
is
global
in India,
goodwill, perhaps.
exactly, in India, I can tell you, people want to change to vegetables, to fruits, to milk, and to other things. You can't put a mountain of rice before a person. I mean, I come from South India. Let me tell you
Yes.
that consumption of rice has gone down there per capita. Wheat has gone down. Vegetables have gone up. Fruits have gone up. And this is the way the diets change. So when farmers are locked onto a system because of monopolies, then the farmers themselves will be the losers in the long run.
Deepshika, on this point, do you want to add anything quickly before I move on to the next subject of discussion? This issue of diversifying of crops. You see, we Indians are also changing. The new generation is changing its preference for food. Food habits are on the change. And how long can we go on with this dependence on some cereals and not diversify?
Definitely. Dietary habits are changing. People are
Yes.
moving to other grains. And, this whole system sort of, it was thrust upon the farmers in the way that they were prompted to sort of grow these cereals because there was an assurance that these would be bought and so on forth. So it wasn't a very healthy system the way it worked. But here again, Smita, I'd like to reiterate one thing here. Now, if you look at our food subsidy, our PDS system, it is not being dismantled here.
No.
So the government will have to be making purchases of these cereals for the PDS system going forward. So this whole fear or apprehension within the farm community that the whole MSP system is being dismantled and so on, it doesn't really hold water because government is bound by law under the National Food Security Act to provide food to its citizens, to BPL citizens under the NFSA. So that is not being done away with.
Right.
So
Point
the
taken.
MSP system will remain,
If I understand, what you are saying is that since the PDS system is not going anywhere, so this fear about procurement not happening is really unfounded because the government needs to procure all that grain.
Unfounded. I think this is something which needs to be communicated to the farmers more effectively.
Yes.
That the government has to run its, PDS system. It has to maintain buffers. Now, where will it, get buffer stock from? It is not going to start importing. It will be buying from the farmers in the country.
And thank you, Deepshika. And allow me to move on to the next subject of discussion on our table this evening. This week, viewers, will go down in the history of independent India as the week when Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid the foundation of a new parliament building, the temple of a vibrant democracy. This building is going to be part of the larger Central Vista project. Earlier, the Supreme Court gave the green signal to the project, though it cautioned against undue haste. While the PM has termed it a milestone and a true reflection of new India, leaders of opposition parties stayed away from the event. Before I go to my guests, let's listen in to what the Prime Minister said on that occasion.
इस मंदिर की प्राण प्रतिष्ठा करेंगे, इसमें चुनकर आने वाले जनप्रतिनिधि भारत की एकता अखंडता को लेकर किए गए उनके प्रयास इस मंदिर की प्राण प्रतिष्ठा की ऊर्जा बनेंगे। जब एक एक जनप्रतिनिधि अपना ज्ञान, अपना कौशल्य, अपनी बुद्धि, अपनी शिक्षा, अपना अनुभव पूर्ण रूप से यहां निचोड़ देगा, राष्ट्रहित में निचोड़ देगा, उसी का अभिषेक करेगा, तब इस नए संसद भवन की प्राण प्रतिष्ठा होगी।
Professor Nalapat, we have seen the Central Vista project and particularly the new parliament building generate a lot of heated debate in the intelligentsia, in the media. Some people are looking at the old parliament building as a relic of a colonial period, while the others are saying that that is where the republic was born, the constitution and everything associated with it. So why go for a new building? The government's argument is there were security concerns, and when India is going to be 75 in a short while, why should we go on with the old structure? How do you look at this entire debate, sir?
Well, I'd like to say that change is inevitable.
Yes.
Change is natural. And frankly, if you have stasis and absence of change, it leads in nature to regression. And it avoids progression, leads to regression. Now, the past is wonderful, but the most important for every citizen of the country is the future. So from that point of view, frankly, even in this particular aspect, I mean, there have been explanations given as to why a larger building is necessary. Of course, I would like to say that this larger building will obviously have more members of parliament, but I would like to hope that the proportion of members
You
of
are
parliament...
hinting at a new delimitation of constituencies in the country that is, possible in a while, about 2 years' time.
I'm hinting at more members of parliament from each state in the
Yes.
same ratio, because I would like those states that have done a certain amount of population control not to be suffering as a result. And I'm sure nobody wants that. And fortunately for us, even the states where populations have been rising fast, now they're showing a decelerating trend with increase in literacy, increase in employment, and with increase in modern living. So it's a very welcome trend, and change is part of that trend. So I only like to say that, look, the past is wonderful, but you can't be, tethered to the past. You have to move towards the future. It's like I remember in the old days, why does India need color television? I
Yes.
remember when Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister, poor Rajiv had a very tough time arguing with people because when the Asiad Games was going on, actually Indira Gandhi was prime minister.
And then on computers, after
and then
color
on
TVs.
computers, and then on so many other issues. For example, on digital reservation of railways, which is now a fact of life. So there has always been this opposition to the new, but the fact is the new is natural, the new is inevitable.
Deepshika, I wanted your comment on this here. If I am not wrong, although most national journalists who cover national affairs are visible in parliament, you are perhaps one of those journalists who is a regular in covering parliament, and you are there every day. And I've been seeing this for years now. From your experience of your coverage of that complex, do you really think the building is a threatened one? And how do you look at opposition leaders not making a show at the foundation laying ceremony?
The current parliament building is definitely, it is open in that sense, and we've seen this building was under attack, has faced attack in the past.
Yes.
So obviously there have been security concerns and which have been highlighted by the government. But also, to the point that, if you see the buildings around the Central Vista, which house various ministries and so on and so forth, I am of the view that, you need to have new structures to, house these ministries and so on and so forth, because over time, the ministries have grown, the way they interact with people, everything has changed for them. And they need better infrastructure, and that can happen only with newer structures. So perhaps this is a step in that direction, a new parliament building that will cater to the new requirements going forward.
Professor Nalapat, just a very quick comment, sir. Some opposition leaders and even some experts were commenting on the timing of this event, saying why now, we could have waited for a while, too much is going on with COVID and everything else. I mean, do you see merit in that argument, sir?
Well, I'd like to say that, I think the 75th anniversary of our independence is an important anniversary.
Yes.
And Parliament being at the heart of the democratic process, I think it's a worthwhile project. I'd like to say that those who didn't want color television were the first to adopt it. Those
Yes.
who didn't like computers, and certain political parties fiercely fought it. Now those political parties are filled with computer experts, frankly. So in the same way, I think once they see the new Parliament building, I think even those who are opposing it today will not oppose it 2 years from now.
Absolutely, sir. So on that very positive note, both our guests are very clear in saying that, while sentimental value is definitely something to care about, there are practical issues and there cannot be a better time to go in for this new project than this 75 years of independent India. A new India has new requirements and we cannot keep our eyes closed to it. On that positive note, viewers, I must wind up our show this evening. But before that, let me profusely thank Professor Nalapat and Deepshikha for coming and joining us in this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Professor Nalapat and Deepshikha. And with that, viewers, I must say good night to you. But do keep watching DD India. And we here will keep scanning the media for you.